Kilby Blades is a USA Today bestselling author of romance and women's fiction. Her writing journey began in the mid-90s when she wrote a fanfic based on the show Dawson's Creek. Over the next 20-plus years, she wrote over 15 fanfiction novels and many more short stories. In 2017, Kilby's debut novel, quote-unquote, won multiple honors, and she's since written and published many more, garnering 50 awards along the way. In this episode, we talk with Kilby about her fan fiction roots, feminist romance, the benefits of submitting to awards, and why she ultimately prefers to be traditionally published. To learn more, be sure to listen to today's episode of the Fearless Storyteller podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Fearless Storyteller podcast. I'm your host, Ethan Freckleton. Have you ever noticed how fear stops us from creating and sharing our best work? Join the Fearless Storyteller as we explore the heart and soul of writing stories, songs, and scripts that sell with the people who write them. Each guest has their own unique hero's journey and insights into the intersections between limiting beliefs and success. Help fund the show today and get the support you need to take the next step forward on your own unique journey as a storyteller. Visit patreon.com/Ethan Freckleton. All right, enough with that. On to today's show. Kilby Blades, welcome to the Fearless Storyteller.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm happy to have you. You come recommended highly. And for for people who may not know who you are, what would you like to share about yourself?
So I am a USA Today Bestselling author of romance and women's fiction. I published my first novel, Snapdragon, in 2017, but I have a long 25-year history of writing fan fiction before that. So I think that's where my real writing career lies.
Wow. 25 years writing fan fiction?
Yes. And strangely, it feels strange to say that because I don't feel very old. But if I do the actual math, the first novel-length fiction that I was writing was fan fiction in the sort of mid to late 90s.
You're not the first guest I've had to have gotten a start writing fan fiction. And so clearly there's this scene, this whole world from that era that I kind of missed out on. I don't know. Do you remember what you started with as far as writing fan fiction goes?
I do. So my first fandom was the Dawson's Creek fandom.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that show premiered around like maybe 1995 or 1996. And before I ever thought that I would be a novelist or before I ever thought that I would write full-length stories, even though I always liked writing, I was always more of a television junkie and more of a movie junkie. And, sometimes the show writers get something wrong, or sometimes the show writers, particularly if you're a romance person like I am, sometimes the show writers get the wrong couple together. And what you really want to see is a different couple be together. Or what you really want to see is sort of a Scooby-Doo ending on a scene that happens or on a series ending. And for me, fan fiction was always about reimagining something different from what the writers did. And it was always fun to play in that world. And it was always fun to read other people's reinterpretations of what could have happened if the writers had done it differently.
Right. And so this is the mid 90s. Where were these being shared, or where was the community?
The internet was young, so there was a website that somebody just put up. It was called Capeside Diaries. The fictional town that Dawson's Creek is set in was called Capeside. I think it was supposed to be New Englandish. And somebody had, I think it was a GeoCities site. I don't even think that they owned CapesideDiaries.com. It wasn't that sort of thing. And I remember at the time, the show itself didn't have that much content. It was kind of a hard time to be a fan, because if you were a fan of something, the internet was young. You could go to, Netscape Navigator and search for something. There wasn't even Google at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And all you would find was whatever probably cut rate website the television network had bothered to put up. And I remember, going to the Dawson's Creek website repeatedly, and it was like 2 pages and it didn't really have much. So that fan community was born of people liking the show, and fans sort of created a community around that. And then the fan fiction sprung up from there.
That's interesting. And did you find it just because you were searching on your browser, or how did you hear about it?
That had to have been it, because the friends that I made through that fandom were not people who lived near me, or were not people who I knew in real life. They were people who I met online. So I think it was by virtue of searching for something, anything related to that fandom, that was where I found other fans.
Yeah, that was an interesting time on the internet, because I think that's a lot of communities legitimately formed up under like just these interests we had, shared interests. I remember that time. So 25 years writing fan fiction. I imagine over the years, your stories or your interest in them may have evolved. Like how many stories are we talking about, and what did you get into?
I probably wrote 15 to 20 stories. I would say about 12 of them were novel length. Some of them were just one shots, and others of them were shorter stories. And you're right, my fandoms did evolve. So actually I wrote a couple of stories for Dawson's Creek and met a lot of friends who I ended up meeting in real life, actually, and some of who I'm still in contact with. But my next fandom after that was The West Wing. And The West Wing, I've always been interested in the romantic relationships. And of course I ended up being a romance writer, but in The West Wing, I wrote a lot of Sam and Josh fan fiction, because I felt that they were the real couple in the show. And at the time, this is again sort of late 90s, early 2000s, you probably aren't going to see a gay lead character on a major network show. And I just remember there was a ton of Sam and Josh fan fiction, because a lot of fans really saw the chemistry between them. And I really like that as well, that exploration of, well, there are things that they're not going to put on TV because the mass market isn't ready for them. But what I loved about fan fiction is that fan fiction always seemed to explore those themes that were sometimes hinted at, but that were just a little too edgy for mainstream markets.
Yeah, that makes sense. And did it feel edgy to you to be writing it, or was it just like, hey, come on, give me what I want already?
It didn't feel edgy to me to write it. To me, they really felt like the natural couple. And I will, full disclosure, my entire fan fiction career is reinterpreting the pairings in certain franchises. So literally every fan fiction I've ever written is like, I've taken the couple and that's created by the original creator and broken that couple apart and created a new couple out of who I think the real couple would be.
And so, like, for those who don't write fan fiction or never have, like, what is it that you got out of the process? That's a lot of work you put out there.
I think it was an outlet for my imagination. For example, another fandom that I wrote in was Prison Break. So in Prison Break, you have a main character who's in prison, like literally every season he's in prison, but he has a crush, and a mutual crush, on the prison doctor, who's a woman. And of course he's in prison, so they can't actually ever like kiss or go out on a date or anything like that.
Right.
So yeah, so I think for fans of that couple, there was sort of this pent up, like, but I would just want to see them, like, what if he wasn't in jail, and what if they could actually hang out together? Like, what would a normal relationship be like if this isn't what life was like for them? So I think part of it is just taking that flight of fancy on your imagination. But honestly, the other reason why I hung around the fan fiction world for so long is because a lot of the writing was really, really good. And people don't know that. People think that fan fiction is sort of like derivative and cut rate, but Um, I have read most of the great fan fiction that I've read is better than the great, for sale on retail platforms literature that I've read.
So it sounds like you were really involved both as a reader and a writer in that process.
Absolutely. And I credit a lot of my fan fiction career for allowing me to debut as the writer that I am now, because, even though I put out my first novel in 2017, I actually understood a lot about readers and about putting my work out there and about setting expectations and having a thick skin for feedback, and how to take a lot of things that I think are hard for new authors sometimes. I feel like I really learned a lot of that in the fan fiction world.
I see. So there was a feedback or a critique kind of culture in that world?
Yeah, with fan fiction, a lot of times they're being released as serials. So chapter by chapter, like if you go on fanfiction.net and you kind of have people who are just like waiting for you, when are you going to put out the next chapter? When are you going to put out the next chapter? I think that taught me a lot how to write cliffhangers at the end of each chapter, which I think is a good skill for writing genre fiction, as I do now. And also just getting in that flow of hearing feedback. It's like, oh, I really didn't like what your character did then. And even if I understand the character, understand what I was trying to do, just having an awareness like, other people might see it differently, and understanding the implications of that, and understanding how readers might feel about my choices. And also just developing that skin for some people are going to like it, some people aren't going to like it, so that the stakes didn't feel so high when I put out my first book. I didn't, I think some authors get to their first book and it feels like, they're putting something out there for the first time. And what if people hate it? And it feels like such a value judgment on them. But it just wasn't my first time putting my work out there. And I think that's made me more fearless as an author and more resilient.
So the 25-year overnight success debut author,
right?
Kilby Blades.
Right. It's hard. It's overwhelming to put your first thing out there. And sometimes I see authors who have had a really big break for their first novel. And I can't imagine that kind of pressure, where you get a really big deal for your first novel, but it's like the first thing you've ever written.
Yeah.
That sounds really hard to me.
Yeah. And you probably don't have a process yet. And yeah, I was just hearing about somebody who's now making as much as their husband, and now they're feeling all the feelings of like fear and what happens if I let my readers down with the next thing I write, right? Did you have any of that experience?
I don't know if I've ever felt fearful of letting my readers down. I can't say that I've had that exact sentiment, but I do understand the anxiety that comes once you've reached a certain level, or once you seem to be in a certain flow. Actually, the one time I feel like I've been fearful of letting my readers down, I was writing a story back in 2010. I was writing fan fiction, and then I got pregnant. And I completely lost my mojo. My creativity changed. My energy level changed. Felt like I couldn't write for a long time, going through all of the changes that you go through when you realize you're about to have your first baby. And then, of course, what happens? I end up with a baby. So, once you end up with a baby, well, then you really can't do anything. So probably now that I think about it, that's one moment where I had a story and I was like, I really don't know whether I can finish the story and when I would finish the story, but people have been waiting for the ending of the story for like a couple of years at this point.
Yeah.
And I hear about other authors who go through similar things, not necessarily a baby, but I mean, gosh, so many people have lost their mojo during the pandemic. And like, I
Yeah.
know people who haven't written in months,
Yeah.
who have series they haven't finished, and they do have that anxiety. So I think I connect with it on that level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how long did it take you to kind of get back in the saddle, and what did it take?
My personal opinion is that it was hormonal changes. So I think that my hormones went out of whack. And then after, my body came down from, not being pregnant and not having, like breastfeeding hormones. I mean, it was a good couple of years.
Yeah.
But I think after I sort of got my body chemistry back, that was when I had a spark of inspiration. Also, I didn't read for a long time. And, a lot of times writers are like, yeah, you just got to be reading all the time. And I don't think I really understood how much me reading actively connected to my motivation for writing. And it absolutely did. So I also started reading. I remember I picked up a Penny Read audiobook and started reading a Penny Read series. And actually reading that series was the direct catalyst. Even though I was aware and stressed out about the fact that I wasn't writing, reading that series actually was like, oh, I should be writing again.
And I imagine it was a good read for you then. Like,
it was great.
Yeah. Because I can read books that aren't so great, and I don't necessarily get inspired to go do that, versus maybe hearing a song, they really connect to, and it's like, I'm ready to go. Let's go. Let's create.
Yeah, I don't know why that is. I mean, I don't know whether anybody's ever studied it. Do you know, or do you have a theory on why that is? Why consuming something great is in itself inspiring?
Yeah, maybe not a theory, but I know that, like, it makes me stop and focus, right, just on what I'm receiving, and getting some good endorphins from it, I think. And then I'm just ready to sing, or to create. It's like, well, why am I not doing that?
Yeah, I'm glad I have that. So something that I've had some anxiety over is, I hope that never goes away, because the other thing that I hear a lot of sort of authors who have been doing this for a while talk about is how reading becomes different. Where, if I'm in the marketplace and it's a competitive marketplace and I'm thinking from a business perspective, what's the next book that I'm going to put out? And I go read the book that everybody's talking about, well, then I'm comparing.
Yeah.
And then I'm second guessing.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I hear a lot of authors who are sort of just past the career stage that I'm at, probably at the career stage that I'm headed for, hopefully, who say, yeah, like reading can be kind of triggering for me.
Yeah.
So I definitely have fears about that. Like, I don't ever want to reach the point where reading is triggering for me. And I've actually decided this year to read a little bit differently, and to try to hedge against that happening.
So what does reading differently look like for you?
Well, I have a sort of distraction issue. So sometimes if I'm writing in one subgenre and I go read something in a different subgenre, I'm afraid that it's going to pull me into a different headspace. Like if I'm writing rom-com, even though I really like a good horror story or a good post-apocalyptic dystopia, like I don't want to take my brain from light to dark necessarily, right?
Yeah.
But I also am conscious of that issue. It's like, well, if I'm writing something that's like trending right now in the space that I'm writing in, I don't want to like even like a little creep of insecurity or questioning to come in. So I'm sort of strategically staggering what I'm reading to be not too close and not too far, and sort of going on a rotation where I still get to read across a lot of genres, which I wasn't doing last year. And just getting everything that I want to read at a time that's going to be sort of a healthy time for me to read it.
Yeah. Wow. I feel like there's so much to unpack there in this last 2 minutes, like a whole panel.
Yeah.
Because like I know. So I did 10 years moonlighting as a songwriter and doing the whole thing that we're doing now, writing books. And, and I've kind of set that aside, right? Because you can only really do one thing well. And I listen to less music now because I know if I if I get too inspired, it's going to derail me. I'm going to want to open up my recording stuff, get my recording stuff set up, and just like go do that.
Right. I think derailing is a serious thing for creative people because we have the gift of inspiration, right? Like we are inspired. That's what makes us creative.
Yeah, yeah,
But then you have to channel that inspiration sometimes into something very specific without getting distracted. And that's,
yeah.
Definitely like, oh, there's the book I'm writing, but then there's the plot bunny that I just had last night and it's so good.
Yes.
And I want to write that, not that.
Yeah.
And, that's a real struggle. And I think the busier I get, I also think about that. Like, how do I put enough on my writing calendar that my writing calendar is full, that I'm publishing regularly, that I'm keeping up with my deadlines and commitments that I want to make.
Mm-hmm.
But how do I also leave myself just open enough so that when that shiny thing, catches me out of the corner of my eye, I can follow it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, like inspiration's a tricky thing, right? Because I feel like you can get inspired for the day. The next day, you've got to come back to your project, right? So,
Right.
And so you're being careful about what you're taking in during the process of writing a book. And what do you do? Like, do you have like that spot in your writing process where you just kind of hit empty and you need to go somewhere to refill your creative well? Like, how do you manage that?
I do. So I think my natural writing process that works for me is to stop when I'm on empty and to jump around, which my brain can do. And I know some people's brains can't. So I know some people tell me they sit down and they write chapter 1, then they write chapter 2, then they write chapter 3. I tend to, like I can write chapter 25 of a book first and sort of jump around. And I do that. For me, I think that's good because the chapters that I'm excited about writing are probably the most exciting chapters anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes if I stop at the end of chapter 3 and go decide I'm going to write chapter 11, and then after that, I, skip around more, I come back and realize that I was having trouble writing chapter 4 because I don't need chapter 4.
Yeah.
So I definitely stop if something's not working. I don't, stare at my blinking cursor until the words for a specific place come.
Mm-hmm.
I think one luxury that I haven't had lately is really putting things down for a long time. And I used to do that a lot. Like I used to, write act 1 of a book and then put it down and not pick it up until a year later. And, wow, this is still good. I definitely want to finish writing this. And then I'll, keep going and not be stuck anymore. So I find that
what shifted that you can't do that anymore?
My just publishing deadlines. Yeah. So I think before, so I started out, I haven't said this yet. So I started out as an indie author, which I was confident to do because of the fan fiction. I felt like I knew how to write a story and I knew how to, have it edited. And in my professional life, I am a marketer. So I decided that I also would be fine marketing my own stories and not sort of going the traditional publishing route. The other thing that's worth saying is that a lot of friends from the last fandom that I wrote in, which is Twilight, became New York Times bestselling authors as indies. So I just personally knew a lot of people who had become indie authors and had been very successful. So I felt probably overconfident about being an indie author.
There's a success bias, isn't there, when you're around people who are successful?
There definitely is. And I was mostly overconfident, I think, because of my marketing background. And then quickly, the first book that I published was an erotic romance. And I quickly got put in advertising jail because it had content for
Yeah.
I made the mistake of,
You broke into jail.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a laughable non-starter from the perspective of that I thought I was going to advertise my books, and then I couldn't advertise the books because they had adult content.
Yeah.
So huge, costly rookie mistake, but it was fine.
Yeah.
But when I was indie publishing, it was easy for me to sort of decide what I was going to publish next. And now that I'm doing more traditional publishing, and I'm writing series for bigger publishers, and I owe them a new book every 6 months and all of those sorts of things, I'm not really putting anything down for a year anymore.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. So I've interviewed a lot of indie authors, and I'm an indie author myself, working on a book deal, and that's exciting. But I don't hear a lot about people who have to deliver books every 6 months for traditional publishing. Is that a romance genre thing or something specific to your niche?
I think it has more to do, well, so I don't know outside of romance. It is common to romance if you're writing a series. A lot of romance series are released pretty rapidly. I mean, a lot of indie authors in romance and in genre fiction are doing rapid releases.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually teach a course on writing romance. And for authors who are writers not of romance, I teach a course on why it's good to write romantic subplots. And there's all this research about how romance readers are the most voracious readers in the markets, where they read faster, they buy more books, and they are not necessarily loyal to authors. So like if they start reading through your series and your series either ends or your series, and you've only gotten to book 3 and there are going to be 6 books, they're going to just move right on to the next one. And 2 months from now, when your book 4 comes out, they've probably read like 60 books between.
Yeah.
And they don't necessarily care about your series anymore. So
no pressure.
Right. So I mean, writing quickly is something that's happening in romance because romance readers read quickly. But my specific goal that I discussed with my agent was I did want multi-book deals, because I found the cycle of pitching to be a bit burdensome in and of itself.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm happy with my 3-book deals.
So how do you pitch a series?
It can happen a lot of different ways. So the first series that I sold, I pitched a manuscript that I had already written to the publisher, and the publisher didn't think that the book concept was the right concept for what they were looking for, but they really liked my voice. And the publisher said, well, I think you have a great voice, and there's a series that I think you could write that your voice is right for, and that the genre that you write in is right for. Would you be interested in writing a series like X? And then I said, okay, let me go back and think about it. So then I came and I thought about probably 10 book concepts that could go in that series. And then I went back and I spoke to the editor of that publishing house. I said, hey, what do you think of these 10 concepts? And she told me the ones that she liked and the ones that she didn't like. And we came up with the concept for the first book. And I wrote an audition chapter. And based on previous work that she had seen from me, and she had gone back and read one of my books, and based on the audition chapter, I sold that series on proposal.
That's cool. And so this was a publisher you had approached with your book that was already completed.
This is a proposal that my agent helped me get with a publisher. Now, I have a completely different series that I sold where I wrote the first book, and the publisher liked the first book. And when I submitted it as a novel with series potential, and alongside the full manuscript to the first book, I sent in a 2-paragraph blurb of what the second and third books could be.
Yeah. And that went pretty smoothly.
Yes, and then got offers for the entire series.
That's great. Well, and so you mentioned having an agent. Sounds like that's an important part of your process. Is there anything you'd like to share about that process, like how you came across one or found one? How important was that?
I actually got my agent through Twitter pitching. So that was, everything that led to wanting to be traditionally published was this sense that, I realized that I didn't really want to be spending that much time on marketing for my indie titles.
Mm-hmm.
And realizing also that I could earn new readers in different places by spreading myself around,
Mm-hmm.
right? That I was bringing something to a publisher by bringing a fan base if a publisher decided to buy one of my books, and that a publisher is bringing something to the table by bringing me their fans if I published with them.
Yeah.
So I recognized that I really had a hard time timing the market. So I was writing very, very good books that were not getting the readership that I thought they should be getting. I was selling books, but, not killing it by any stretch of the imagination. But I was also winning a ton of awards for my books. So I've won like more than 50 awards for my books, and I've been in publishing for 4 years.
Wow.
So I recognized that I was writing very good books. But I recognized that I was writing very good books that were not necessarily what the market was asking for right at that second.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt that an agent could really help me position my work better, because when I was pitching to publishers directly, and when I was, entering contests, and sometimes I was entering contests for unpublished work, where the goal was to either get an agent or to get a publisher to buy your book, I got a lot of, your writing is really, really good, and like, we're not sure that this is the concept that we're looking for. And my agent absolutely helped me with that. So, I had a bunch of manuscripts in my pockets or partially written work in my pockets. And she was like, this is what we can sell right now. This is great. And we can't sell it right now.
That's great.
And she knew that, which is what I needed her to know. And she, I've only been with her for 6 months, and she's already sold a bunch of my work.
Yeah, that's great. Like, I spent a lot of time hustling in the songwriting thing, pitching for film and TV. And, if you blind pitch with stuff you already have, it doesn't work very well. You have to know what people are looking for. And is that why you were submitting to so many contests, or were there other reasons as well?
I draw a distinction between an award and a contest, even though I call them contests. So an award is for something that you've already written. Mm-hmm. And a contest, usually for unpublished, is, like I was saying, like, get noticed by a gatekeeper who might acquire you by virtue of having been a final judge. So there's a lot of that in romance, and a lot of that in science fiction. It's like the final judges are always big agents and big editors.
Gotcha.
And your goal is for them to read the first 3 chapters through a contest. And if you place in the contest, maybe they're going to ask you for a full, and that's definitely happened. Or maybe you win a full critique or something like that, which has happened. But I think part of my impetus for contests, being a marketer, I was absolutely convinced that winning contests and awards would help me in certain settings, and it has. So, for example, BookBub is a huge force in fiction. If you get BookBub promotions, you're going to sell 35,000 books in a day.
Yeah.
If you are an unknown author trying to get BookBubs, it's really impossible. I know authors. One of my friends today just released her 25th book. This is her first time ever getting a BookBub. So I realized that as an unknown author, I needed as many feathers in my cap as possible. And the awards were helpful. Having award wins to get my foot in the door in certain situations was absolutely helpful. Also, sitting at tables at book signings when nobody knows who you are, but if you have a big shiny foil seal on the front of your book, I had a lot of people who I knew didn't know who I was, because nobody knew who I was, coming up to me because I seemed to have a little bit, that little seal is like a little signal. Same thing for ads. Like I tested ads that I did not for my erotic romance. I would show a picture of the book cover with the award seal on it, and I would test it against the same audience without the award seal on it. I would get better click-throughs.
Interesting. Yeah.
So it's one of those things where people thought I was crazy because I was always winning awards. People would be like, why do you do this? And I actually had an author who's much bigger than me sort of look down her nose at me and be like, the awards don't really mean anything. Like, they don't mean that you're getting contracts. All they do is like convince people that you can write, or like she made that sort of snooty comment to me about it. But as a marketer, I knew that it was translating into money for me in ways that most people didn't see.
Yeah. That's a good point, and I don't think anybody I've talked to has really quite put it that way. And so you write a lot. How many books have you published since 2017?
I think it's been 6 full-length novels and 3 novellas, and probably about 5 or 6 short stories.
Mm-hmm. So how are you, like, it takes time and maybe process to, like, I imagine, to be submitting to awards and contests. And so, like, have you like figured out a rhythm for like when you're putting effort into that, or is it just like a bite every day or every week? Like, how are you making that work for you?
So I tend to enter contests and awards, enough contests and awards to either get me that big shiny seal that I can put on the cover, and that's going to attract somebody, or that's going to provide a little bit more, proof of quality for somebody who's never read me. So after I get one shiny seal, then I might stop. My goal is usually to win a couple of awards for each book that I put out, just so that I can put that on a retail page if I want to, or put it in a BookBub featured deal application if I want to. But sometimes I end up with more just because award season is award season. So you're kind of applying to all of them at once.
I see. And when is award season for, and is it specific to romance or just publishing in general?
The romance-specific awards tend to open up in around the spring. So romance tends to go by calendar year. So right now, I've submitted to a number of awards for books published in calendar year 2020. Mm-hmm. So usually it's like anywhere from, February to April in romance. Awards for last year's books are open, and then you're kind of finding out how you did over the summer into the early fall. Mm-hmm. Other awards that are genre agnostic. So, for example, Forward Magazine does an award. They do the Forward Indies Awards. Those are on different timing. The finalists for the Forward Indie Awards have already been announced, and now, like, the Book Life Prize just opened, I think, on April 1st. So the multi-genre awards are on a little bit of a different cycle.
And is there like a fee involved for submitting to awards, or you just get to submit if you had a qualifying book in some way? Or
Oh, no, there are fees. It's an expensive habit. And there are a fair number of disreputable awards as well, which is something that you really have to be careful of. Sometimes you get these awards runners that are charging $75, $85 per entry. But they don't really have much of a reputation in the industry, or they don't really offer you, they don't really give you much, right? So like the Book Life Prize is put on by Publishers Weekly, right? So, that has a little bit more credibility than some awards that sound like, they're like the indie whatever awards. There are definitely some legitimate ones, but there are also some other ones that are pretty questionable.
I see. Is that's all work you do on your own, or do you have help from the agent with that as well? Or?
All of this I did before working with my agent. So I actually just started working with my agent in July of this year.
Okay, congrats. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And tell me, I wrote down Twitter pitches. So I think I know what you're talking about, but I'm guessing many people don't.
Yeah, so I love Twitter pitching. Twitter pitching is basically when you have agents and editors who are looking for specific sorts of manuscripts, or who acquire for specific genres, will step forward to be part of organized events in which on a single day, authors are pitching for whatever they acquire. And the way it works is you, the author, put together a tweet length pitch. that includes sortable hashtags. So, for example, if I was pitching something that was contemporary romance, I would look at the rules of the Twitter pitch, because there's always an overarching entity that's organizing the pitch. I would look at the sort of taxonomy that the organizers put together. So they'll say, oh, if you're writing contemporary romance, hashtag it CR. And if you're writing rom-com, hashtag it romantic comedy. And if you're writing science fiction fantasy, hashtag it SFF. Mm-hmm. And then on that day, agents and editors would get on and they would filter their feeds by the hashtag for the Twitter pitch event and also the hashtags for whatever genres they're acquiring. And then they would just read through all those tweet length pitches. And the etiquette is, if you're an agent and editor and you heart somebody's pitch, that means that you want to see the manuscript or that you want to see chapters. And the etiquette for people who are not agents and editors is, don't heart anybody's pitch, but if you like it, retweet it. So that gives agents and editors a chance to see how many followers are interested in a certain book concept. And then it gives you, the author, the opportunity to see whether an agent or editor hearted your pick. And sometimes your pitch, and sometimes if they do, they'll just private message you and give you instructions for submitting directly to them. And you submit to them, and they know that they were interested in your story concept from your pitch, and it is intended to keep you out of the slush pile and get you sort of a fast track to being seen by them.
That's cool. It seems like pretty low effort, low hanging fruit thing to do if you're on Twitter.
It is. And there are different, so there's something called DV Pit. So it's like hashtag DV Pit, which is for diverse voices. There is Pit Mad, which runs a few times a year. There's a science fiction and fantasy pitch. I forget the hashtag for that, but most individual genres have some sort of Twitter pitching event, and the organizers of the event attract really good, agents and publishers. But you also have to check out, anybody who requests to see a manuscript. Don't just send them your manuscript, check them out and make sure that they're legit as well.
Yeah. So for your pitch, you pitched something that you had already written?
Yeah, usually you need to pitch. You're pitching something that you have written and that you're ready to send. And in some cases, the agent or editor will ask for a few chapters. And in some cases, they'll say, we want the full manuscript. So it's a good idea to have the full manuscript ready for anything that you're pitching. So I got hearts out of that pitch, and the agent who I ended up working with read chapters that I sent her after that pitch event, it was Pit Mad. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, that's interesting. And so here you are. You're kind of hybrid now.
Yes.
Do you Are you thinking are you thinking you'll pretty much stay in the trad pub camp, or are you thinking you'll kind of cross promote or have other things come out that you self-published?
I might do a little bit of both. I mean, and I think it's funny how it all goes back to the fan fiction, but I think I'm somebody who's realized that I'm just always going to write. And what I personally get out of being part of the writing world is A, I get to write, which I love and which I'll always love. And B, I really care more about being part of the writing community and being in communication with fans, right? So I love going to book signings, and I love going to writers' conferences, and I love going to retreats with other writers, because I've always gotten a huge sense of enjoyment from just being part of the community and being a reader. And, it was the same way when I was writing fan fiction. I knew all the authors, I knew all the readers. And I really liked being in community with everybody. So for me, part of the trad pub move as well is I just want to focus on the parts of this life that are richest for me, and figuring out what the market wants, and, spending a lot of my time on advertising. That's not really why I do this. So from that perspective, I do think that trad pub is going to be great for me unless I reach a point at which I can completely and totally outsource the business side and have some sort of business manager telling me, like, who I'm consulting and saying, like, oh, well, I'm thinking about this and I'm thinking about this and I'm thinking about this. Which one should I write right now? Like, I would basically need that person to help me manage my indie career, because I don't think I'm ever going to want to do that.
Yeah, it's a lot of time.
Right, and some people love it. I have author friends who are like, who are on the charts every day, looking at what's trending, knowing where covers are going, and knowing
there's great data. There's great data out there if you have the time and energy. So for your traditionally published books, are you like, do you have to specify or negotiate in the contract for like how you capture readers to your own newsletter or that kind of thing?
No, the contracts are mainly just about the book that I'm going to write and, whether I have the sub rights or not.
But you can put your call to action at the end of the book in your manuscript and they'll publish it, or like, how does that work for capturing your new fans from that new market?
So usually it's typically I think it would mainly be like, subscribe to my newsletter, visit my website. I don't expect the back matter. So everything that I have out now that's traditionally published, the back matter doesn't contain links to my other books that are not with that publisher. So I think that there's some promotion of my brand, but in my experience, most publishers in romance are linking to more books that are published by them.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I noticed in your bio, like, right, maybe tying this back around to less business and more why. So you write romance and women's fiction, and your bio mentions that you're a feminist and social justice fighter and all those things. So, like, what does that mean to you as an author?
As an author, it means that I don't think that I can decouple who I am from my characters. So I think being a feminist and a social justice fighter was more an observation of my work than my work as it naturally came out, than me saying, I'm going to sit down and write feminist romance, or I'm going to sit down and write social justice romance. Like, it's not intention. It's just who I am. And it comes out of every single book. Right. So like, I have a second chance romance where, one way to look at it is, they were going to get married and she left him at the altar and now she's in a sticky situation and she needs his help and he's going to come save her. Like, that's a very like common romance trope where, you have a breakup, but then they need to get back together. And it's like, well, why did she leave him at the altar? Like, that's such a common romance thing. But of course, because I wrote it, she is a former victim of sex trafficking who has gone in to take down a major player who's trafficking young girls. And she decides that she's going to sort of not do it with the help of the vigilante justice organization she works for. She's gone in on her own. And then, of course, she sends a beacon to her ex because she's in a very sticky situation. So it's like, it's romance. And somehow, because I'm me, it's about sex trafficking, right? So that's sort of what happens. I feel like the stories that I think of bring up the lives of women and have a lot of vigilante justice and have a lot of social commentary, because those are the things that I think about.
So romance traditionally is not necessarily maybe this is just my perception. I've edited a few and seen, but they're not necessarily all feminist, ideals, right? In terms of the storylines and how they work. I don't know if that's something you've seen or not, or thought about, like the distinction between feminist and non-feminist romance.
Romance novels are more feminist than people think they are.
Mm-hmm.
one way to look at romance is to say, romance is the only genre where usually it centers on the heroine, and the heroine always gets what she wants.
Mm.
Women's fiction, arguably, women's fiction is not the same because the woman doesn't always get what she wants. But in romance, she almost always does, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's something inherently feminist about romance because it's about women being victorious in their own lives.
Mm.
And I think the stereotype is that the victory is walking down the aisle with some man. But actually, in most romance, it really isn't. In most romance, yes, the woman ends up with the love that she wants, but she also usually ends up with a whole bunch of other things that she wants as well. And part of the arc of the story is about her crafting the whole life that she wants, which includes the partner.
Yeah.
But I think there's a way to look at romance that says actually romance is quite feminist. I do agree that the idealization of, it's still pretty heteronormative. It's still pretty geared towards sort of like marriage and children and nuclear families and monogamy and all of the things that don't necessarily fit everybody.
They don't represent everybody's narrative, right?
Yeah, they don't represent everybody's narrative. So I do think that romance struggles with that. And my personal opinion is that there are two romance markets. I think that there's a romance market that are the people who are on the coasts, who expect something a little bit different from romance. And I think there is a romance that is, does very well in the middle of the country.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's a sort of there's an unacknowledged differentiation of romance markets.
That's interesting. And so being an outsider, how would I be able to tell the difference? Is there coded language or coded genre names or?
I think there is. I think that and I hate this language because I don't think it's exactly right, but there's definitely romance with more traditional values.
Mm-hmm.
So chances are if you see a cowboy on the front of a romance novel, chances are if something describes itself as a small town romance, a lot of times that's the sort of coded language for, you're going to get people whose goal is to sort of be married and live in a nuclear household.
You can get that in the man chest ones as well, right? So
yeah, you can get that in the man chest ones as well. But I would say the heroines are different. I mean, something that we have, for example, reverse harem is a really popular genre right now, right? And it's like the heroine who's in a reverse harem relationship is in a very different relationship than the heroine who's in a cowboy relationship.
Okay. Well, just to finish the thought, so what are the markers then of the kind of quote unquote coastal romance?
I don't know. So I think the readers are different, but I don't know that it's figured itself out to that degree. And I don't want to go too far down the road of stereotyping.
Right.
But, if you walk into, I don't want to go too far down the road of stereotyping, but
thinking from a marketing perspective, right? And because I think it would be easy to run and go into this genre and write something for the wrong audience, based on chasing sales or trends or that kind of thing, if you were intimately familiar with the differences.
I think a lot of the signaling does happen on the cover, though, and a lot of the signaling happens in just the trope. So I think that the small town trope expects that traditional thing and the cowboy expects that traditional thing, versus if you have more of a, rom-com with a really playful, cartoony cover with, a college-educated woman living in the city, that's going to be really different. But it's also going to be clear from the front that, there might be like a little cartoony cityscape in the background or something like that. So I do think the covers are doing the signaling of whether you're, of what the heroine in particular expects for her life.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, and I imagine you're obviously stepping out of spending so much time advertising and marketing your stuff, but for things like you say, like reverse harem and those sorts of things, right? There is like on like Amazon side or other sites, like it seems like some of these search terms get banned or keywords end up putting you into some sort of jail as well, like erotica used to do.
Yeah. So, and a lot of it has to do with what the bots know and what the bots don't know. So I have a friend who does great writing reverse harem and advertising on it because she uses really coded language on her retail pages. Mm-hmm. And she's careful about what she puts on her cover. Mm-hmm. And there are interesting things about that too. I mean, a lot of times, you'll get ads showing female sexuality banned, mm-hmm. and ads showing male sexuality not banned.
Yes.
And the same thing with book covers.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm getting to. Like, yeah. It seems really, well, speaking for myself, it's really frustrating to see. And
yeah, there are ways around it, but yes, it's a very weird thing.
It's very, yeah. I mean, I get what's happening and why. I don't get why it's still happening and pervasively, and and there's not organized resistance to that.
There are wild debates on the author forums where it's like, well, you can show a little bit of bare midriff, but like side boob goes too far. And like, people really breaking down, like, well, this picture, I'm going to show you a picture of my ad and this ad got through. And then other people, like, oh, well, this ad didn't get through. And other people being like, oh, well, this is why that didn't get through. And this is why, I mean, it's just, it can get really crazy.
Yeah. And sometimes you can just resubmit your ad and somebody else sees it and arbitrarily decides that it's cool.
Yeah.
Well, so what's ahead for you? What are you excited about?
I'm really excited about just writing this year in a different way. So the same book, like every book that's due this year is a book that I've known about for a long time. But one, I mentioned before that I really like writer community and being around people. And this year I'm going to do that again. So last year, like the last writing retreat I went on was like mid-February of 2020, like a month before everything locked down.
Yeah.
So what I'm really looking forward to actually are getting together with other authors later this year because, we're vaccinated, and just seeing humans again as part of my author life. I just signed up to do a signing in Paris in April of 2022, and I'm really excited about that, partially because Paris, but also because I'm really excited to see fans and sign books and do all of those things that I haven't been able to do as part of this author life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw that post. That's exciting.
So excited.
Something to look forward to.
Yes.
You said you mentioned writing retreats and things. I was like, sign me up.
It's so nice.
If I could just just do all my writing at writing retreats, that would be amazing.
Right. And, I've got kids at home, so I don't get any peace and quiet.
Yes,
I mean, it's very difficult to write. And I find that, my biggest, the thing that helps me the most for writing retreats is actually the drive, just like driving for a few hours and getting into a different headspace. And usually, living in California, all my writing retreats are usually someplace that's like very nice and natural, whether it's the beach or whether it's the forest. and just sort of getting out of my space and getting into a different space and getting into that nature energy is so beneficial to my writing and to my spirit and all of those things. So I'm looking forward more to that part of the writing process than I am anything else this year.
Yeah, that's great. Well, for people who want to learn more about you, how can they do so?
You can go to kilbyblades.com. Probably the place that I hang out the most is Instagram. And just Instagram and Facebook, just like my everyday Facebook, not even my Kilby Blades author page. I just like hang out on Facebook all the time. And this is a total aside note, but I'm super, super into K-dramas. And I run a K-drama Facebook group.
Okay.
That is awesome. And that is one reason why, if I'm not productive, it's probably because I'm writing a K-drama, or probably because I'm reading a K-drama.
Well, so for people
watching a K-drama.
So for K-drama fans who are like, oh my God, I want in this group like now. Like, what's the group name?
The group name is OSRBC Asian Dramas.
OSRBC Asian Dramas. Okay. This, like, I have no idea what any of that means, but that's awesome. Very exciting. Well, Kilby, it's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me and taking me on a walk down memory lane. So thank you.
I hope you've enjoyed today's episode of The Fearless Storyteller. As a reminder, any and all links can be found in the show notes. And if you're enjoying this podcast, will you please consider leaving a review? By doing so, you'll be helping new listeners discover the Fearless Storyteller podcast.